Welcome to episode 16 of Lucretius Today. This is a podcast dedicated to the poet Lucretius, who lived in the age of Julius Caesar and wrote On the Nature of Things, the only complete presentation of Epicurean philosophy left to us from the ancient world. I'm your host Cassius, and together with my panelists from the EpicureanFriends.com forum, we'll walk you through the 6 books of Lucretius's poem and discuss how Epicurean philosophy can apply to you today. Be aware that none of us are professional philosophers, and everyone here is a self-taught Epicurean. We encourage you to study Epicurus for yourself, and we suggest the best place to start is the book Epicurus and His Philosophy by Canadian professor Norman DeWitt. Before we start with today's episode, let me remind you of our 3 ground rules. First, our aim is to go back to the original text to bring you an accurate presentation of classical Epicurean philosophy as the ancient Epicureans understood it, not simply repeat for you what modern commentators teach about it today. Second, we won't be talking about modern political issues in this podcast. Epicurean philosophy is very different from Stoicism, humanism, Buddhism, Taoism, atheism, and Marxism. It must be understood on its own, not in terms of any conventional modern morality. Third, the physics presented by Lucretius is the essential base of Epicurean philosophy. When you study this, you'll see that Epicurus taught neither luxury nor minimalism, but that feeling, pleasure, and pain are the guides that nature gave us to live by. Not supernatural gods, not idealism, and not virtue ethics. More than anything else, Epicurus taught us that there's nothing supernatural whatsoever, and that means there's no life after death. And any happiness we will ever have must come in this life, which is why it is so important not to waste time in confusion. Remember that our homepage is lucretiustoday.com, and there you can find a free copy of the versions of the poem that we're reading. In this episode 16, we'll discuss how the atoms are never destroyed, that the atoms provide continuity to all of nature, and that there's a strict limit on the divisibility of all things. Now let's join the discussion with Martin reading today's text.
But still, if nature had prefixed no bounds in breaking things to pieces, the parts of matter, broken by every passing age, had been reduced so small that nothing could of them be formed that would in any time become mature. For things we see much sooner are dissolved than are again restored, and therefore what an infinite tract of ages past has broken and separated and dissolved, in future time can never be repaired. So that certain bounds of breaking and dividing must be set, because we see each being is repaired, and stated times are fixed to everything in which it feels the flower of its age. And yet, though the first seeds of things are solid, all beings that are compounded, such as air and water, earth and fire, may be soft, however made or by what power formed, and from them be produced, because there is a void still mixed with things. And, on the contrary, if these first seeds were soft, what reason can there be assigned whence hardened flints and iron could be formed? For nature would want the proper principles to work upon, and therefore these first seeds must simple solids be, by whose union close and compact all things are bound up firm, and so display their strength and hardy force. Again, because each being in its kind has certain bounds prefixed to its increase and to the preservation of its life, and since by nature's laws it is ordained to each how far their powers to act or not extend, since nothing changes and everything goes on as it began, each kind of birds must steady in their course, shew the same colors painted on their wings. The principles of matter whence they spring must be fixed and unchangeable. If the seeds of things could change by any means, it would be unknown what could be formed, what not, by what means every being is limited, and stops short within the bounds it cannot break. Nor could the course of time in every age, the nature, motion, diet, and manners of the old sire impress upon the young. Besides, because the utmost point or the extreme of every body, something is the eye cannot discern, it is not made of parts, but it is in nature what we call the least, which never exists of itself, divided from body, nor ever can, because it is the very first and last of something else. For this, by heaping up such parts as these, one by another, that complete the being of every body. Since then they can't subsist apart and separate, they must needs stick close, nor be divided by the utmost force. These seeds therefore are in their nature solid and simple, formed of smallest parts bound close, not tied together by united seeds of various kinds, but in themselves entire, eternally unmixed and pure, from which nature will suffer nothing to be forced or lessened, reserving them as first seeds to form and to repair those things that die. Again, suppose there was no least, the smallest bodies must be composed of parts boundless and infinite. The half of every being must then contain another half, so there would be no end of still dividing. And where could be the difference between the smallest and the largest bodies? None in the least, for though the whole be entirely infinite, yet bodies that are smallest would contain infinite parts alike, which, since true reason exclaims against, nor will allow the mind to give assent, you must, convinced, profess that there are bodies which are void of parts and are by nature, at least since such there are, you must admit them solid and internal.
There's a lot of important principles in this section.
Well, in general, it's more argument for these indivisible particles that he called atoms, but now we call the elementary particles. And so he's continuing on in that theme. This first paragraph, Martin, it sounds to me like he's thinking about entropy in a way where he says, for things we see much sooner are dissolved than are again restored. So is he anticipating the tendency towards entropy there in that one little sentence? That's really amazing.
I don't think so. He uses it in a different way than it looks at first. I think he uses this passage to make a proof of refuting the opposite. And here it's actually the opposite what he means. It's the indirect proof what he tries here.
Well, so where he says things are, it's easier to put things apart than to put them together. Things we see much sooner are dissolved than are again restored. How could that not be entropy?
No, because it's at the end. He said, because we see each being is repaired and stated times are fixed to everything in which it feels the flow of its age. And this is the refutation of what he said before. So that means if it appears to be that things fall apart easily, then he makes then the counter statement, but we actually see that.
Okay, so he just didn't take it. Yeah, he didn't take it all the way. So
yeah.
Okay.
So he's basically taking this to show that this view that everything falls apart quickly leads to contradiction with observation.
Okay. All right.
I'm not sure. I'm kind of more with Elaine on that at the moment. Martin, let's be clear about how we're defining entropy. What does that mean?
So the definition is through the probability. No? So it's given by the entropy of a certain state is a measure to the probability that the state exists. So the system could be in another state, and the entropy measures how probable the state it is in which it is currently now.
Okay, now, see, I understood that word differently. I thought it was a measure of organization versus disorganization.
No, this is
definitions.
This is not a definition. This is an interpretation which, by pattern recognition, seems to work. But for me, it was an obstacle that delayed until the third year of study my understanding of entropy, when we learned this properly in statistical physics. So this is so misleading. I think 2 years ago I had a discussion with Alex where I put this out already. So that it's not a measure of order or disorder. It's just by coincidence that quite often the state which is more probable appears to us to be of lesser order.
We may have a situation then where the scientific definition, which I'm sure you're probably correct about, is so different from the way it's generally understood that we've got to clarify what we're talking about.
Right. So I thought, Martin, I may be wrong, but I thought entropy was thermodynamic, and it was the degree of unavailability of heat energy for conversion into work. But you're saying that's not the definition anymore?
I mean, it could be. I mean, I cannot recall now how this derives from the other. The primary definition is from statistics. It's part of thermodynamics. That's right. But the fundamental definition goes over probability, and then based on this one, you can derive some corollaries to characterize entropy, and then something like what you say may be the result.
Okay.
You know, guys, we started on this because Elaine asked, is this not a precursor of the study of entropy? Maybe the sentence needs to be modified that this is a precursor of something else, but not entropy. I don't know.
Well, I think it touches on it. Okay, so here I'm going to have to go to Wikipedia. I don't know if they're even right, but it looks like maybe there was more than one definition.
No. There's one primary definition from statistics, and that's the one which is valid. And all others have usually the limitations.
Well,
For example,
it says here there are two equivalent definitions of entropy, the thermodynamic definition and the statistical mechanics definition. But the classical thermodynamics came first, right?
What is because I don't recall the thermodynamic one. Can you state it now?
Okay, so for a closed thermodynamic system, a quantitative measure of the amount of thermal energy not available to do work. And the statistical definition was developed later. It's real interesting. This may be over my head.
Maybe the more important issue is we're trying to make sure we're understandable by people of general learning. What do you take from this discussion so far about what Lucretius was trying to say? Because I'll go ahead and say again, although my understanding of entropy was obviously less sophisticated, I was thinking that where Elaine was going originally was correct, that Lucretius is saying both that we observe that things are more easily dissolved than they are put together again. Now, whether you call that entropy or something else, I think that's what he's saying. But then he's also saying at the end that there's a limit to that. And in the end, it does not go any further than to get down to the ultimate particle state. And then from that is where we observe that that's why the universe still exists. If it did not stop at the particular state, then the universe would no longer exist after an infinite time.
Yeah, because it would eventually dissolve.
Yeah, plus the things reconstitute. And this can only happen with seeds. And that means this is another proof for him that we don't see it completely fall apart, that these smallest particles exist.
Right, so Martin, this would not be compatible with the heat death of the universe.
Yes.
True? Okay.
Epicurus doesn't know about that. He doesn't anticipate it. So that doesn't match to it. And that's why I also don't want to over-interpret anything of what Epicurus write and as an anticipation of entropy.
Okay. It's like he kind of almost got there, though. He noticed some stuff. Yeah.
Entropy is a word which exists basically only by their physical definition. A lot of words like work and energy, they have their prior popular, so to say, meaning, and in physics it's sharpened. So we have so often a conflict between what this means in popular knowledge and what it means specifically in physics. But with entropy it's the other way around. This is a thing defined in physics, and then it has been taken popularized under the banner of popular science.
Right.
So that means in this case it's easy just to refer back to the physical definition, and that clarifies it, despite that some of these popularized things like disorder can lead to contradictions.
Right. So, listeners, don't worry if you don't understand all the statistics and the physics. I think there's a good enough case made here that at least within the boundaries of our experience, we're obviously not going to be around for the heat death of the universe, that there's evidence that the breaking down doesn't continue indefinitely.
And that's my perspective of the significance of this, is that he's talking to people who are of average education and intelligence. And the person of average education and intelligence can certainly see in their own experience that it is easier to destroy something, to smash a glass, than it is to put the glass back together again. It's easier to smash an egg than it is to put the egg back together again. So it's common experience that it's easier to dissolve things than it is to assemble them. And so if the universe has existed an infinite amount of time, which perhaps is a point that he's going to be making later, or maybe he's already made it to some extent, but if the universe has existed an infinite amount of time, it's easier for things to dissolve than to come together. Then why hasn't everything just dissolved into nothing? And the reason is that elements themselves cannot be dissolved.
And so we can still use that kind of reasoning even for a universe that will end in heat death and had a beginning, and that time is so long that it, during our human history, it might as well be as if it were infinite and not going to have an end.
Exactly.
Okay,
So
good.
this is the
Yay!
most.
I got it exactly from Martin. I need to
Yeah.
take a
So
moment and
this is the
appreciate this.
most. That is the most straightforward way to reconcile the eternity in Epicurus with what we know today.
Yes. Thank you, Martin. I feel really good. I'm excited. I got my
Well,
physics in.
that's such a profound statement from Martin there. Martin, do you want to restate it again in your own words? What is the best way to reconcile modern physics to that position?
Yeah, by whatever the length of the time has passed before, by whatever beginning there has been, plus the end of it through something like heat death or through the expanded acceleration of the universe, either of that, this is so far before and after the birth of the first human and the death of the last human that we are not worried about it. And it's not from me. I saw this stated before I stated it from our Finnish friend.
Ilkka.
Ilkka.
Yeah, Ilkka stated this one.
Yeah, good.
Okay, before we move on, Charles, anything on this?
Not on this paragraph, no.
Okay, very good. Okay, what about the next passage?
That's that hard body thing. Again, we kind of covered that 2 sessions ago, where he thinks that the elemental particles are hard. So back then that made sense. I don't really think we have to belabor that.
Yeah,
Even
and I
though
believe also 2 sessions ago we also talked about the terminology of seeds in early materialist philosophy.
Yeah, right.
Okay, what about the next passage about how everything goes on, each kind of birds and the seeds of things? So that's what Charles just commented on, basically.
And that's similar to the beginning of this book where he talked about we're not just seeing surprise things. So the same line of reasoning that he used to eliminate the possibility of the supernatural, now he is saying this also shows you that there are these fundamental particles. So
somebody might ask, if in looking at that where he says if the seeds of things could change by any means, it would be unknown what could be formed and what could not be formed, and what means everything is limited. And probably at this point we ought to comment on how that relates or is itself limited, or how that limits the impact of the swerve. The seeds themselves not changing, but on the other hand, the seeds themselves being able to swerve.
But that's not mentioned here. No?
That's implying that's implying that there's a disconnect between the swerve and the actual properties of the seeds.
Right. So limited number of things that the seeds can do, but that doesn't affect the probability of, the range of probabilities that are available are still there.
I always saw the swerve as a byproduct of the seeds or the atoms.
Well, when you say byproduct, what do you mean by the word byproduct?
As in...
Because again, while you're looking at that, the general point here being that the seeds are how nature continues itself along the same path, basically, in the way that birds have colors on their wings and different other examples that he's giving there.
Yeah, so, I mean, the swerve is a part of the action of the seeds. It's not possible for the swerve to break down the seeds. So I think those are different.
I think the swerve is not touched in here, because we can construct a universe with hard bodies which behave like this, which don't have swerve, and those which have swerve. And the whole reason for the introduction of swerve is to save the free will, or however we want to call it, from the determinism which a materialist universe without the swerve would have.
Martin, whenever we get back into this argument, doesn't it have 2 illustrations in Lucretius? And of course, I think it does that in book 2 instead of here. But number 1 is free will. But doesn't he also say that's why basically the universe came together, because the atoms?
Yeah, right. Because otherwise they're going in a straight line.
But that one is because of the weird start conditions which Epicurus chose. You can choose different start conditions which would assure this without a swerve.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I'd have to touch up on that part about the byproduct later, but it will be touched upon in book 2. It's kind of about the movement of atoms as a whole.
Well, the general point that I kind of keep in my mind, I think, and somebody can correct me if they disagree or have another spin on it, to have a pun there, the issue that I continue to think is important is that you have both fixed and unchangeable seeds in the form of the atoms, and at the same time you also do have some amount of indeterminacy in the way the atoms, when they do come together and the things that they can do, there is room for some change at the same time that there's also things that are not changing.
Right, but not change in just breaking them down indefinitely. So I think those are two different things, and they shouldn't be seen as paradoxical.
Yeah.
It's easy. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, is how easy it is to create paradoxes because of language, but reality doesn't actually have a paradox in it.
Right.
I mean, our modeling still has paradoxes.
The what?
Our modeling of reality. There we still have unreconcilable paradoxes.
Well, so by that, it's because there are things that we don't completely understand. I don't think we would say reality itself is contradictory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is our expectation.
Right. So that's our thinking and our language and so on that leads to that, but that's not the nature of reality so far as we know.
The problem is in the model and not in reality.
Yes.
Yeah, or we rather cannot tell it. We still hope that in the end, reality doesn't have these paradoxes. No? So that so far we see it only as a deficiency in our models.
Yes, right. I bring that up because there are, I guess, sort of new age kinds of thinking, I would say, that put a lot of significance on paradox. And I felt like you were almost going there a little bit, that keeping these two things in mind that are not reconcilable. Those two things, I think, are just different aspects of the situation and are not in conflict with each other. But it's real important when we look at this to not get into that kind of new age thing where like the truth is in the paradox kind of business, or you want to keep conflicting ideas in mind. Really, if you've got conflicting stuff going on, it means you just don't know. You're missing something. You're missing some of the information.
Reminds me of a friend of mine who's obsessed with duality.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So I had a conversation with somebody about that this week, that they wanted to transcend the duality of pleasure and pain. And I was like, well, there must be some kind of pleasure that's what making you want to transcend it. Otherwise, why do you want it? We just went around in circles. I never could get anywhere. It was frustrating.
No, I think there's a lot of different types of duality. And for most people, it's usually substance.
Yes, right. You're right. And so this is a materialist philosophy. So we're not, I guess in that sense, it's not dual because we're not in like matter and spirit. I don't know where I was going with that. I guess my original point was just we have to be careful that we don't suggest that there's something special about maintaining cognitive dissonance, because that's not the goal.
Yeah. Just to kind of add on to that, Epicurean philosophy is monistic in the materialist sense. Yes. However, if you really wanted to pull that angle, you could say there is a duality of pain and pleasure, but I wouldn't go that route. And even then, the only thing binding it is just choice of language.
Yeah. Well, no, I think in experience, there are clearly two different categories of feeling, the pain and pleasure, and I don't think we have to get fancy with that and try to break that down. They're both feelings, sure, but there are ones that you want, ones that you don't want. So
I'm very eager to get into book 4 of this. It's my favorite one, and it's one I'm more well versed on.
All right, let's see. So then we got to finish book 1, but what?
Right.
2 and 3.
Book 4 and 4. The next paragraph.
This is almost going back towards Zeno's paradoxes. These last two passages are, it seems to me. Or going back to the need to refute Zeno's paradoxes by talking about the possibility of infinite divisibility. But the first part here talks about parts of the atom.
Right.
Is there a least part?
Yeah. I don't see anything here that is, you can really... I'm not sure we can do anything else. I think it speaks for itself.
Yeah, Elaine, I guess what I think you're probably going towards is I do think there's a lot of discussion in some of the different texts that I've read who try to get a lot of information out of this about whether the atom has parts or not. And you can get really into the physics of that, but that's probably not significant to us at this point. Martin, again, since physics is your area, does an ultimate particle have a part Does it have an edge? Does it have a corner? On the corner of the atom is discussed somewhere.
No, this is a thing where Epicurus, he had essentially hard bodies. He modeled reality with hard body as elementary particles, and we don't have that anymore. So because of the uncertainty principle, so if we take the swerve more serious and also apply it to the size of the body, then we see that the outline of the body is only defined by probability lines. So there are no hard bodies at the elementary level.
According to our current physics models.
Yes.
Right.
And anything which would have really, which would not have this continuous smearing out of the elementary particles would be in contradiction with quantum mechanics. And that one is a bit, so we may expect eventually some modifications to this, but not that fundamentally that we get back to simplistic models with hard bodies. We may use them in simple cases, but we know very well it's not applicable when we go deeper. Or like I mentioned already, there is a discussion of a new particle which is of enormous size. So instead of having an extremely small elementary particle which we then observe with some kind of microscope in a laboratory, it's the other way around. When we detect this particle, then the whole laboratory is inside that particle.
Or appears to be, according to the model.
Yes. So the way we describe this particle is that it's supersized. But this is speculative. So we have not yet found this particle.
Yeah. So this is a criticism of some modern physics, that the models can get so far ahead of the evidence sometimes that it might as well be science fiction.
Yeah, at this point. So that's why I don't like to talk about the multiverse or something like this, because it's really speculative. But it's not. It's good. Because the problem is that eventually we'll have some physics beyond the standard model, and so this supersized particle is something what is in our reach, and with ever higher energies in our accelerators, if it exists, we will eventually see it. So that means this one is something what awaits the experimental confirmation or not, rather sooner than later. And with the multiverse, there is not even a single piece of a chance that we can get a feel by when we will ever get a experimental verification on that. So it's just not around. It's purely speculative.
Right.
That takes me back just to Elaine's point earlier that it's important not to allow ourselves to be mesmerized by paradox and just left floating in the air that, well, we don't understand this, and maybe the truth is there is no understanding. Or
now it could be, that I think there is a legitimate possibility that our human brains are not going to be capable of putting all the pieces of the physics model together in the way that's totally consistent. Would you say that, Martin? I mean, there's been some speculation that our cognitive capacity is possibly just not sufficient to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really have an empirical base for that.
Okay. Well, so it's possible, but I'm not saying that it's certain. Would you?
Yeah. We don't have that certainty. We may have eventually limits, which possibly, for example, if there is an alien race somewhere out there which has this capability to think deeper, and if I don't expect that we will ever encounter them because they're too far away, but if they exist and have this deeper knowledge, they may be able to train us to understand to that next level, for example.
Although if they understand it all and they're as happy as the Epicurean gods, maybe they want to stay away from us.
I mean, they will possibly have curiosity like us, that might make them go on space travel.
Could be.
Always laughed at the interpretation to some very newcomers to Epicurean philosophy that the Epicurean gods are alien gods.
So you would not think that he meant that?
Actually, this is how how we interpret how Epicurus meant it.
I mean, we're not talking about like the movie E.T., but they were material beings that were not on the Earth, so that kind of makes them basically extraterrestrials.
It's easy for people to automatically go to that conclusion with all the sci-fi connotations, is what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. That we're talking about like like a literal, like the E.T. movie character kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With
Okay. Somebody needs to make a movie with the Epicurean extraterrestrials to show what they would really be doing.
Yeah, but the problem is that the part in which the wise man can sense them is refuted by our physics. So that makes it a bit difficult to make that consistently. So as of now, those Epicurean gods, as Epicurus described them, are even more far apart from us than they were at that time.
I wonder if there are any popular, well-known science fiction scenarios that even come close to
Just, having a
Right.
group of very happy extraterrestrials.
I've suggested before that the Star Child from 2001: A Space Odyssey sort of gets the gist of it, but I haven't read the book, so I don't know all the lore, and it's been over 10 years since I've seen it. So
I mean, what you would have would be, at least to get close to it, you would have a group of very long-lived beings that were enjoying themselves together and learned to
There
live.
was one Star Trek, one of these in this Star Trek series. There was one which came close to it.
In the movies or in the series, or one of the series?
I don't even remember that one, but I guess it was in one of the early movies. The thing is, I don't remember the title, but I can give briefly the summary. So what happened is that I think it was the Klingons and the Federation were both approaching a planet where the people appear to be in medieval age. And they, I think the Federation wanted to stick to the rule that not to interfere with a civilization which is not yet advanced enough, but the Klingons somehow wanted to exploit that planet, I think, or something like this. And over this, then they were about to start a war, and suddenly they couldn't continue. And then this super race revealed itself and said they set up this medieval civilization only as a deception. So to keep people away, they themselves lived in bliss and were not concerned about expanding into the universe. No? And so the result of this one was
I need to find that one.
Martin.
The result was then that the Klingons went back, and of course the Federation as well, because there was no point, because those ones had a superior capability.
Yeah. So, I wonder if the people who wrote that had read Epicurus.
I guess so. Meanwhile,
I wish we could find that out. That would be interesting.
There was we found it out recently. We stated it recently that Captain Kirk has explicit Epicurean ideas, and I'm pretty sure this is so close. The Roddenberry, whoever wrote this, must have read Epicurus.
Neat.
Martin, your episode you're discussing is called Errand of Mercy, episode 26 from season 1.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm starting season 1. I don't know where I'm on episode 10 or something, so I'll get to that soon.
That's a good analogy, Martin. I did not follow your comment where you said that Kirk had some specific Epicurean inspiration. Do you have any recollection?
Yes, this was when we had the discussion about the pain. Then, because when there was, and this was one of the more recent movies where they had this guru who led them to a false god on a place where no civilization had ever been before, and there was something like a godlike creature.
Oh, yes.
But this guru, he trapped the people with painlessness. And then Captain Kirk was quoted as saying, "I need my pain as a guidance." And this is fully Epicurean.
Yes, I remember us discussing that. I guess on maybe the Facebook page, there's a clip on YouTube where Kirk is saying, "I need my pain" or something. Elaine commented on that, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. And this is not Stoic. If it was Stoic, he would just, you need the pain to train yourself to withstand pain. No? Stupid. No? But there it's clearly shown the pain is a guidance, is a help as a guidance. No? And I don't think we have that anywhere else in this ancient philosophy than with Epicurus.
Interesting. Well, I'm going to keep my eyes out for that. I have seen a lot of like kind of Jungian stuff so far in some of the episodes, but yeah, so I'm going to watch out for
you can see Spock
Epicurean.
Spock sometimes implementing some sort of a Stoic counterposition. And when we can sometimes see a catharsis that Spock changes to the Epicurean side.
Right, where his feeling side is what makes
Exactly.
it work.
Exactly.
Oh, great point.
In one episode, he goes into some severe training where he becomes as unemotional as possible.
Yes.
And he ends up laughing in the end.
Yeah, right. I've watched a lot of these when I was a kid. I don't know if I got every episode, but I'm going back after decades to rewatch the original series. So I'm still where they're in the process of building that up. But that was the major theme with Spock, is that logic is not going to actually help you, without feeling. The feeling is critical. So, that is pretty darn cool, Martin.
Yeah, and it's often so that Spock's logic helps them often out of trouble, no? Because he can extremely quickly make an estimate on what is the most logical way to go out of trouble. So Kirk relies often on him that so logic has its place. No?
Well, and it's also not just his logic, it's his knowledge, right? Because sometimes what they're calling logic is just, I think it's mislabeled. It's information, which we have. And so, but when it comes to making a decision about that information, that is where he has to have his feeling, or he can't, he can't function.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Martin nominates the Organians. That's the planet where the Errand of Mercy episode takes place, as an example or a potential example of something beginning to approximate Epicurean gods.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we should make a list of where we see bits of Epicurean philosophy in popular culture. I have a feeling that there are more of us out there, or even people who don't know they're Epicurean, right? But they've kind of figured out the basics for themselves.
And I think this is important because pretty much the Stoics tried to interpret this popular culture in their sense, especially with science fiction.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
There was a thread we had some significant discussion on. Martin, somebody was suggesting that one of the Star Wars episodes was predominantly Stoic.
Star Wars is an example of, in popular culture, which is really heavily on Stoicism. Like this, here's the uprising there. It's never successful, it's completely useless, and many of them just die in Stoic fashions without that it leads to real happiness. I mean, what is not Stoic about it, a Stoic would just not do a revolution. So that is a non-Stoic part of it. But that clearly the revolution or this uprising, I don't know how to call them now, but anyway, those use Stoic methods to basically to get through and fail.
All. Right. Well, I'm glad I started rewatching it, and I will be on the watch out.
Well, we have one more passage left. What about the last passage here about if there were no smallest bodies, then half of a being must contain another half, so there'd be no end of division.
Right, and that there would be no difference between the smallest and the largest body.
Because the smallest body would itself contain an infinite number of particles.
Yeah, right. I think you're right that that's a Zeno's arrow kind of refutation.
It's probably worth commenting on in the midst of this passage that he states the idea that there are infinite parts within even the smallest body is something that, quote, true reason exclaims against, nor will allow the mind to give assent.
Yes.
That's stated a couple of different ways here.
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. And I think we had a conversation with Ellie where she was talking about practical reason, and what she means is reason that is connected completely to observation. So it's just something that our observations of reality would say, no, that's not possible, rather than things like the multiverse and getting your logical processes way outside of what you can observe.
We could probably take this another hour to discuss this particular point, but I don't know whether this is the first, but this is going to be an example of in Lucretius where he talks about true reason. Both Bailey and I think Monroe say it that way. Monroe
Would it be just like common sense?
Well,
like this is just ridiculous to think.
Yes, but I think that the terminology is what I wanted to comment on there, because he's referring to this as true reason, which implies that there is a false reason. So the whole terminology of reasoning, the word reason itself used alone is not apparently sufficient to say whether it's true reason or false reason, or good reasoning, bad reasoning, or common sense, like you said. But I think there's something significant here in the use of true reason, as opposed to, why not use a word like folly or use a word like imagination? There's a contrast to be made, I think, between true reason versus how you use the reason, like you just said that Ellie was talking about. If reason that's based on connections with reality.
Martin Ferguson Smith says sound judgment.
Yeah, dialectics is an example of false reasoning, no?
Yeah.
And those who are the proponents of dialectics, they see this as a way of reasoning.
Right. So they're actually promoting a method that he would say is not true reasoning. Dialectic is not true reason.
Because it's not connected to evidence. It's not supported by evidence. Oh, it's so interesting. So Stallings also says sound reasoning. Solid, sound judgment, sound reasoning. It wouldn't be sound if it's not backed up by evidence.
Yeah, whereby, depending on who uses what dialectic reasoning, they may incorporate some observation as well. So it's not necessarily always something purely speculative.
Yeah, but so it's more of a cherry picking, meet their point, which you see a lot, so not just for that, but even in various dietary schemes and so on. You can make your imagination go first, and then you can find stuff to support your point. Whereas if you start from the evidence before you've made your decision about what's going on, you're going to be more likely to be accurate.
I wonder also if there is any significance to, as I'm comparing these translations, I see the 1743 says true reason exclaims against it, nor will allow the mind to give assent. And then Monroe says true reason protests and denies the mind can believe it. And then Bailey says true reasoning cries out against this and denies the mind can believe it. I'm wondering if there's a sense of emphaticness.
Oh, yeah.
Or almost
it's
a
just
sense
like,
of,
this is just ridiculous. Who would say such a stupid thing? Yeah.
I'm not articulating it very well, but I'm wondering if there's a sense of feeling here that you're not just 1 + 1 = 3 and saying, no, that's wrong, and as if it's insignificant. There's almost a sense of urgency or feeling
that
involved.
You care about it.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's right. Great point.
I'm not sure what the point is exactly, but I do think there's something there that it's not just dry and...
Well, so there's feeling involved in, making your conclusions about reality. When you run into somebody who says the earth is flat, don't you kind of I have some feeling involved in my frustration that, why are you believing this thing that's clearly incorrect? It naturally arouses some passion in people.
Well, and something else that comes to mind, what does the word confidence mean? Is confidence a feeling of confidence?
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that not the way you measure logic, in a sense, that you have a feeling that you're confident that it's correct?
Yeah, I like this direction. That's true. Well, this goes along with this idea that we're not ever really neutral creatures. Our feelings are simultaneously with our perceptions.
Yeah, that's where I'm going. We're not just computers who are processing information without any caring about what that information is. We're feeling beings with feeling at the core. Well, we probably ought to begin to wrap up unless somebody has more thoughts.
Yeah, just to make clear again for this last one. No? So meanwhile, we can do this without the elementary particles having to be solid.
Yeah, right.
Martin, just to make sure I understand exactly what you just said and meant, you're saying that you can reach the conclusion that infinite divisibility is logically impossible without particles being solid.
Yes. So this is possible without being solid, because we see them now based on quantum mechanics. So just as probability distributions, where each particle gets assigned a probability distribution of where you can find it, and it's still one particle. And that means there's void, and it's partially filled basically at any of its points in space. And we still have elementary particles like this, so not solid. They can overlap, and in this way form compounds.
And so you're saying that even though elementary particles may not be solid in the sense that Epicurus thought about them, it is in fact still possible to walk across a room.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Zeno's paradoxes about motion and arrows and so forth are not valid.
And sound reason exclaims against that being impossible, because I've seen it done.
That's exactly right. I think that's where we're going with some of that emphasis in the last passage, is that you don't just hold in abeyance in your mind possibilities that are floating out there. You not only bring them down to a conclusion, but you feel the urgency of bringing them to a conclusion. You realize that life itself is requiring you to take action and to be confident in your conclusion.
Right.
And confident, that calls to mind a passage out of Lucian's Alexander the Oracle Monger, and I can't quote it exactly, but when he's talking about Alexander the Oracle Monger and saying that this person was a fraud, that what was needed was an Epicurus or someone of like mind who would have confidence that even though he might not know the precise way in which the fraud was being conducted, that it was a fraud. It's not necessary in the end always to know the precise way in which things are done in order to be confident in your assessment of it.
Yeah, right. That's relevant to this. Mm-hmm.
Well, anything else for today?
I don't think so. I never know what direction these conversations are going to take off, and so they swerve in these great ways. So I really enjoyed this today.
There's no doubt that discussion of science fiction work is one of the most popular things we could possibly do. So when we post this episode, I'll make a comment that we're talking about Star
all right.
Child, and that will probably again prompt some more discussion.
Yeah.
Martin, anything else today?
No, I'm fine.
Okay, and I think we've temporarily lost Charles, so we will just say goodbye to Charles and close the episode for this week, and we'll be back next week.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Week.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.